All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's 1 o'clock. Welcome to the members in the gallery and people who are watching this live stream. Welcome to the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee meeting, March 4th, 2019. Today we acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. We are thankful to share in the special spirit of this place, rich in the energy of Mother Earth, our ancestors, and the love of all creation. I'll look to the Deputy Mayor for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved, Mayor Saunderson.
Seconder, Councillor Jeffrey, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Any declarations of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Seeing none, we'll go to deputations. We have none on the agenda today. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to make a deputation about the agenda or any topic on the agenda today? Seeing none, we'll get into staff reports. Item 5.1, T2019-02, update on debt position. Treasurer Leonard, are you going to lead us through that?
I'll try, Your Worship.
Good, thank you.
In 2017, Council adopted the debt servicing targets of 7% of own source revenues for tax supported, water rate supported, and wastewater rate supported debt. And staff provide an annual review of the debt position in accordance with our debt management policy and the community-based strategic plan. This year we've made a few revisions to the report and discussion. As part of the debt management policy, the town of Collingwood has adopted a pay-as-you-go philosophy. This year we provided a commentary on potential project delays and repercussions that could occur with the constraints of debt servicing limits and pay-as-you-go spending. And in 2018, the upload of roads, bridges, water, and wastewater assets into our RIPTEC asset management module was completed, allowing us to quantify where we think our infrastructure deficit is still sitting. While not debt per se, it is a significant liability that the municipality must plan to fund or face potential loss of grant funding or even development charge funding. This graph represents the total of tax supported and rate supported external debt during 2018, and as part of the sale of Collis Power Stream, the town assumed an additional $8.2 million in debt. This debt will not be serviced by the taxpayers or water and wastewater ratepayers in the town of Collingwood, and it has not been included in these calculations. But as you can see, the town has made steady progress in reducing the debt and will continue to do so during this term. So right now we're sitting at 24.4, and by the end of this term we'll be at 12, roughly 12. Our internal debt decreased by $685,000. It's partially due to the increased payment on the waterfront trail, the old project when the shipyards first began to develop. We have to pay for that, and we had some surplus last year, so we're able to put down an extra $181,000, and that was done in accordance with our surplus allocation policy. The town's committed debt, the balance remains at $1,370,000. We haven't really had any changes in those amounts. This slide shows us where we're sitting right now in terms of the percentages for the water, wastewater, and tax supported debt. Last column on the right hand side is overall. So you can see at the bottom number there that our balance in debt servicing to our own source revenues is still sitting at 9.85%. We have made some progress in the tax-supported amounts. When we started tracking these debt servicing costs, the water was 7.9% of own source, wastewater was 22.15, and tax-supported was 10.99. And the overall percentage was 12.42, and we have done made a lot of progress in reducing those amounts. We have adopted a pay-as-you-go philosophy, and there are practical limitations to the pay-as-you-go philosophy. Municipal budgets focus on operating expenses and maintaining service levels, making it difficult to find room for major capital assets and infrastructure projects within the budget. So infrastructure projects such as the sewer and water systems, major roadways and large buildings are large projects in terms of dollars required for each one of those projects, which makes it virtually impossible to time these projects or to efficiently spread them out in stages over several years in a manner that would facilitate the pay-as-you-go financing. Federal and provincial programs are offered at the discretion of the funding provider. The timing, duration, and eligible funding amounts of these programs are not known with certainty until formally announced, making it difficult for the town to time the initiation and funding of eligible infrastructure projects. And in fact, the projects eligible for funding may not have as high a priority as other projects, but with the funding available, the eligible project moves to the front of the queue, which in the long run may delay a more necessary project until the reserves or cash become available. And again, there's also the question of whether or not pay-as-you-go is inherently unfair with respect to the basic public finance principle of fairness or equity. Generational equity is a concept that users of a capital project will change over its useful life, and fairness requires those costs to be spread to those who will use the infrastructure over time. So is it fair to tax a resident over many years to provide funds to acquire or construct a facility, only to construct it after the resident has moved and can no longer enjoy the facility? For a project of that type, long-term financing is a more equitable funding mechanism. And I've also included the quote from the Canada West Foundation. It was in an article 2 years ago with the, it's called Smart Debt versus Stupid Debt. So in short, a completely debt-free city should never be the ultimate goal of fiscal policy, regardless of how well it plays politically. This is especially the case if the trade-off is an underfunded stock of capital assets. The pay-as-you-go approach is arguably better for a city fiscally, but it does not always contribute to the overall health of a city. Again, the potential problems with the debt servicing targets, the largest one there is the loss of flexibility to react to funding opportunities or respond to any types of pressures that are faced by the community. So pay-as-you-go and the debt servicing limits have put the town in a much better financial position. And to date, they haven't impacted our ability to complete the necessary projects to renew the critical areas of our infrastructure. But that may not be the case in the future. The cost to delaying the projects includes, but it's not limited to, rising interest costs, rising commodity costs, increased magnitude of the project due to continued deterioration, and public dissatisfaction with the level of service that they're receiving at that time. Asset management liability. This is the elephant in the room. The 2014 high-level estimate of our infrastructure deficit was $8.96 million, which is $9.6 million in 2018 dollars. The plan also recommended that we undertake proactive measures to reduce the deficit over a 20-year planning horizon. The initial AMP estimated reserve contributions for core assets, the roads, water, wastewater, stormwater, and bridges, of $1,030,000 a year. The accumulated total should be $5.15 million by the end of 2019. The town has been contributing approximately 1.5 million to the life cycle replacement reserve fund annually. The problem is that 1.5 million does not just cover core assets. The funds are used to replace such things as seating and flooring at the Eddie Bush, cell upgrades at the OPP station, playground replacements, etc. So the initial asset management plan did forecast in that time period, 2015 to 2019, that we would spend approximately 6.6 million for the replacement or rehabilitation of our non-core assets. And as part of that, the plan did require the issuance of $10.2 million in debt to assist with that rehabilitation of the most critically ranked assets. Again, while the town has made some progress on closing this gap, staff believe that there is still in the range of $9 million infrastructure deficit. So in terms of that asset management liability, is our current funding model adequate and financially sustainable? In a word, no. Financial sustainability requires long-term planning. It requires taking the necessary steps in the near term to manage the long-term risks. And Hume Street is a good example. The cost of the road surface, only the road surface, was $1.8 million. The expected useful life is 20 years. So in 20 years, using an inflation factor of 2%, we need to have $2.7 million in reserve to pay for that replacement. That is $135,000 per year that we should be raising from taxes and saving for the future. And in addition, we should be saving the funds for maintenance along the way, such as crack sealing or pothole filling or that. And a $1.5 million contribution per year keeps up with current capital requirements. It just doesn't build funds for the future. The fiscal strategy that the town uses to fund the asset management plan must change. The fiscal strategy is an interaction between the capital plan, debt management, reserve management, and the budget. There is a pressing need to increase the deposits to the reserve fund. And at this point, staff are recommending that the current special capital levy be increased from 0.75% to 2%. The effect of that increase would be to increase the levy from $17 for the average residential property to $43. That would be my update.
Is there anyone in the audience who would like to, has any questions or like to make any comments on the presentation before I put it on the floor for council? Seeing none, the recommendation is the council receives staff report T20-2, 2019-2 for information purposes consistent with the town's strategic financial plan and approve the recommendations contained therein. And I'm going to move her in a second here. Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor Doherty, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Council comments or questions? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you very much. We just voted on the recommendation to take it to council immediately without discussion. Is that what we just did?
We put it on the floor.
So we shouldn't have voted.
No, I guess I should have got a mover and a seconder. My apologies. We didn't. Well,
okay. All right.
So I'll look to the clerk. The vote then. We'll take that off the books and defer it then until the end of the discussion. Yes, my apologies. So we've got it on the table for discussion now.
Perfect. I have two questions. My first question is just in terms of process of the recommendation. I think because so much of the budget it will be pivotal on this, but I think it warrants a lot more discussion in the public as to what the impacts of what we're deciding are going to be. I'm hoping that the recommendation would be to move forward for this recommendation to come out of the budget process somehow, or another SIC down the road. Is that possible?
I'll look to the CAO. I know we're planning a further SIC discussions and public engagement before we actually get the budget on the table, but I'll ask the CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Jeffrey. I think that's a reasonable recommendation. I think because we have so many things up in the air fiscally, I think it would be reasonable to recommend that this be considered as part of our budget deliberations and also to get the public involved in this. I mean, The critical component of this is not only the policy of pay-as-you-go, but also the recommendation regarding the special levy. Those are significant recommendations that I think could potentially warrant from some public input.
Thank you very much. So Mayor Sonic, if I may, my next step, I have actually 3 pages of questions which I'll try to integrate with my colleagues' other input as we go along. But my number 1 question or observation, and combine that with concerns, is in reading the BMA's report, the town's debt per capita is still substantially higher than the survey average, although declining. And also in that BMA report, the per capita levy is still the highest in the group of 108 Ontario municipalities. And then our municipal health, though, is better measured by its financial position. Ours has been improving based on our previous policies and decisions. So my question is, what kind of decisions would help the municipality to reduce the per capita levy that finally brings all of our good work, reducing debt, pay-as-you-go, all the financial policy we've done to get where we are, that actually comes to the resident in the form of not as a high per capita levy?
That's a great question, Councillor Jeffrey. I'm going to pass that over to the CAO and then to Marjorie. I concur with you. When we took over in 2014, the last council, we were in a net liability position, and we are today in a net asset position. We have been pushing, we've been lowering debt of all 3 types. We've been trying to limit our expenditures moving forward, but as you pointed out, in terms of our overall capital levy, it's per capita is very high. So it's a long-term project, and I think it begs a lot of longer, higher level discussions in terms of our financial plan moving forward and our service delivery model, which goes right across the board from the current reorganization to looking at how we invest the net proceeds from the current sales. So with that said, I'm going to look first to the CAO and then to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Your Worship. That's a fundamental question that strikes at the very core of how we do budgeting. I share your view that I think if we are realizing some gains, then at some point in time, we've got to consider how that gains flow through to residents who pay taxes. Our intention is to try and ensure that the municipality is in a very strong fiscal position to be able to check all the boxes when it comes to good accounting and all of the fiscal parameters within which we judge ourselves and other municipalities across the province. But I think we've got to calibrate that against how we deal with, and I think the Mayor alluded to this, how do we deal with things like additional assessment growth that we experience on an ongoing basis? How do we deal with the expenditure management across the municipality? As you know, Councillor, there are 2 sides of the ledger. One is revenue and the other one is expenditure. And I think we've got to have that discipline where we look at not only the revenue side, but the expenditure side and how we can deliver better service to our residents in a more efficient and effective way. The other point I'd make as well is that we're on the cusp of some major transformation in terms of how we do our budgeting and how we deliver services across the municipality. And one of the recommendations that I think you will probably see in the next couple of weeks or so is a recommendation for us to move to what I would describe as a program review model. And the intention there is to get council's concurrence to review 1 or 2 programs in a more in-depth way every single year. So at the end of a council's term, we would have had the opportunity to look at every single expenditure across the municipality. And I think that will allow us to have a much more, a much better appreciation of where the money is being spent and either validate those expenditures or come up with new ways of ensuring that the money can be either reallocated within that program area or reallocated elsewhere. That to me is a significant process. It's not only an efficiency tool, but it's also a value-added or validation tool. At the staff level, we've gone through an exercise of looking at how we might also reduce our expenditure side as well. But I think the question is at the core of how we do budgeting, and it is sort of my view, and I think the department has shared this perspective, that we don't assume that there will be an automatic increase every single year to the budget. I believe that some of that savings and some of the quote-unquote surplus that we generate on an annual basis should be, some of that should be going back to taxpayers.
Treasurer Marjorie, would you have anything you'd like to add to those comments?
Through you, your worship, no, I believe the CAO has summarized it quite succinctly.
Thank you.
So that's it for now. I'll wait and hear what my other colleagues have to offer, but I do have some other questions.
Okay. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Your Worship. My first question is about the recommendation. I have been reading, just generally that the province is requiring municipalities to do asset management plans. And I see in the notes to your report reference to us having to have something in place by July 1, 2019, a strategic asset management policy. Is that what gives rise to your recommendation to increase the amount before us today?
Through you, your worship, it will be, it'll be a component of it. With this iteration of the asset management plan, we have to take into consideration climate change elements. So in terms of where we're going in the future with some of that, we'll need to make sure we have the money to mitigate those types of challenges that we are going to face. And by the time it reaches the third iteration, I think in 2023, that will include all of our assets, town hall, whatever. So it could be a big number by that point in time.
Thank you. And through you, Your Worship, I have just my other questions relate to the report from BMA, and I'm not sure if anyone's here from that company today.
No, not today.
So perhaps I'll just raise it and see if no one knows. But I had a couple of questions. One is how they selected the municipalities as our peer group to measure us against. And my concern is that some of them are definitely not growth municipalities, and some of them, like Innisfil, large parts of it have been, or maybe all of it, have been annexed to Barrie. Do we have any information about how they chose those?
We'd have to go back when they initially picked the comparators. These are the comparators they've been using for the last 4 years. They did report on that. So we'd have to go back and I think staff could probably provide that information. I'll look to the treasurer.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. Yes, we'll go back through the records and see where they've come from. But in general terms, it's the population and the location that.
I see. Because just on that, I just feel that, just so you know where I'm coming from, that if you're in a growth municipality, you're probably on an upward trend in assessment. And also you have different needs, like we see needs because we have so many increasing numbers of people using our roads. Maybe our infrastructure needs to be renewed and made more robust more often than, say, Springwaters does. But that's just a comment. Okay, my other question on this was, there's some analysis per capita in here, which caught my eye because some of those analyses seem a bit at odds from other parts of the analysis, which seem to be making us, sort of recognizing, as you were saying, Your Worship, that we're doing better. And so it came to my mind, and here's my question. Is the per capita calculated based on our permanent population only, or does it include our part-time residents, which I understand can be as much as 25% of our population total?
Marjorie?
Through you, Your Worship, they use a data mining company, and it's based strictly on the permanent population that, because that's how they do estimate the growth for everybody.
Right, so I'll just leave by saying, you know, I feel that those numbers are not the best reflection because all of this population, like it's the permanent plus, as I remember, I think I remember seeing, we have another 25% of people or 25% of our total population who are also contributing, whose numbers wouldn't be shown here. So I just think it's a skewed analysis and I just wanted to say that, thank you.
Thank you. Council, any other comments?
I
Yes,
have
Councillor Rod.
a question through you, Your Worship, to the Treasurer. In the recommendation, it said the effect of the increase of the special levy would be from $16 for the average residential property to $43. Is that per $100,000 in assessment, or is that $16?
Through you, Your Worship, the average assessment, or the average residential assessment this year is 314,000, so there's 690 or 960. So that would be based on that average assessment.
My second question, through you, Your Worship, is it appears in this report that we've paid down rather a lot of debt in the last several years. What impact has that had in our budget in general? If we're paying down this much debt, we're clearly paying less interest. Is, off the top of your head, do you have a number of how much to the good we are, or to the better that we are now that that debt has been paid off?
Through you, Your Worship, not off the top of my head, but what has been the practice in the past is when a debenture is fully paid out, we would continue to raise that same amount of money so that we would have money to go to reserves. So we've done that. We had a 2001 debenture, I think it was, maybe a 2000. It was to do something with the elevator and the museum and another infrastructure project that was there that was paid off about 4 years ago, and it was roughly $50,000 that went to the museum and $50,000 that went to the terminals. So we've just continued to raise those funds, and we'll be using that to pay down those internal notes and loans there. So, but in terms of the interest, we can certainly calculate how much it saved us over that period of time.
Good, thank you. If there's no further questions, I'll go back to Councillor Jeffrey then.
Thank you. So I think if I just piggyback a little bit on Councillor McLeod's question, my observation is that it was never the previous council's goal to eliminate debt, but rather to bring the percentage of each municipal tax dollar used to service the debt to a reasonable level. So I think, to answer Councillor McLeod through you, Mayor Cooper, I think that our measure would be maybe that 7% was the level determined, but the percentage approach allows the funds available to service debt to grow with the tax base. So while right now the debt servicing percentage is reflected in the BMA at 11%, we've brought that down from what was potentially going to be 16% in 2014. I think that the impact is that our tax dollars not so choked in servicing debt, and there's more room to actually do what we would like to do in our priorities. So for me, that was the answer, and there are continually increases in our financial assessments for which we pay, but we do not control. We don't have a say as to what they're going to cost us. So typically the soft services are those that get impacted negatively, and that's something that we want to balance out, I think, a bit better going forward. So then my next observation was that the CAO's ongoing work to reorganize the staff complement with a view to finding efficiencies and optimizing conditions for best possible staff performance and creating outstanding resident services, it is a critical piece to the municipality's ability to become sustainable. So, however, it too is going to contribute negatively at the outset to the financial pressures. So my question is, how does the reorg costs and capital expense to facilitate staff accommodation offer efficiencies or revenues the municipality can convert to make room for that debt servicing?
I'll look through the CAO on that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey. I think there is an initial cost to the reorganization, which I articulated in my presentation to SIC. In my view though, I think there will be an ongoing annual savings associated with that when we consolidate our customer service operations, when we look at creating the opportunity for staff to function in one location, we could potentially bring some of the operating costs down. And the other thing that we're doing as well, as you would notice, is that we are consolidating or proposing to consolidate, council hasn't approved it yet, departments. And with that, we're also reviewing every single vacancy across the organization. So while the reorganization will not result in any job loss, as positions become vacant based on either retirement or attrition, we're making a concerted effort to ensure that where that vacancy occurs, that position is still needed, or can it be employed elsewhere. So we're going to take a hard look at all of the positions coming up to ensure that they continue to provide value to that area where they were initially allocated. And in some cases, if it makes sense to move that position elsewhere, we'll look at that as a management team. And in cases where it makes sense for us not to fill that vacant position, we'll also look at that as part of our management team. So the initial cost would be to carry some of the new positions being suggested in the organizational review, but I think on an ongoing basis, it could result in some savings as the model reaches maturity. On the staff accommodation piece, I mean, I think that's one of the big challenges we have, and the discussion we've had around the department heads table was to try as best as we can to use technology to facilitate that integration. So we will not be breaking walls and moving everyone to one location, although that would be the ideal situation. We're going to try as best as we can in the interim to use technology to facilitate that seamless interaction between the public and the town of Collingwood. You know, if and when the opportunity presents itself for us to either look at the third floor of this building or reflect on the recommendations in our accommodation study, we'll bring some of those recommendations back to council. So the intention is not to spend a lot of our capital resources on accommodation for the sake of moving staff, but to try as best as we can to facilitate that seamlessness through technology.
Okay, thank you very much.
And actually, just Councillor Jeff, before you move on, just to add to your preliminary comments about the pay-as-you-go policy, the target was to get it below 7% as opposed to 0, but also it's discretionary. At the end of the day, this council has the ability to make any call on debt financing, and so it really is a guideline.
Yeah, for sure, thank you. So when we're speaking a little bit about tools that we use in the budget, my observation first of all is that the reserves are resources our residents have invested in over time to offset a roller coaster approach to investment in major projects, allowing for consistent versus spiked tax hikes. My second observation that land is finite, so if we cannot live within our means without using future growth funds, then we hit a wall, like Mississauga did. So while the report recommends upping the special capital levy from 0.75 to 2%, which I think is a lot, is there another option? I guess that led to my question, does the county model of reserving funds generated specifically from growth for growth work better or just different than what we're proposing in our process through you to the CEO?
Yes, I'll put that through, and just so people understand, because we have had a couple of conversations around this table in the past, what happens at the county to municipal assessment growth, they take a rolling 5-year average, and if that average amount is exceeded in any given year, those funds are earmarked to go into reserve for either debt reduction or future infrastructure costs. So it's not recognized as a surplus per se, it's recognized as sort of pay forward amounts that go into a reserve. So just giving that background, I'll pass it over to the CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey. Municipalities, as you know, have very limited financial tools that they can use to raise revenue. The big challenge municipalities have in Canada is the undue reliance on property tax. The other levers that our counterparts have in the US are not available to Ontario municipalities. The special levy concept is one of those tools that are used to try and raise funds for a dedicated purpose to ensure that, you know, a certain capital facility is built. One of the things that we talked about is, would it be appropriate to apply a special levy for waterfront development so residents can actually see and know what it is that this money is going towards. So this is a dedicated stream of revenue to fund a particular project. That's one that the treasurer has recommended based on the limited number of tools that we have access to. I think it will be up to council to decide whether or not the increase, well, first of all, whether any increase is warranted, and secondly, what that increase should be. To go back to the mayor's point about what is an appropriate debt level, I think the benchmark that we have used historically is reasonable and it's helpful, but it doesn't mean necessarily that we have to stick within that range. As the treasurer mentioned, there are good debts and bad debts, and maybe there's an opportunity for us to try and find a way to ensure that we can incur debt, give ourselves the ability to incur debt if and when that is absolutely appropriate. So we're not going to exceed that 7%, you know, every single time, but there might be an occasion when we are required to exceed that 7% because of the nature of the debt being incurred. So the limited nature of the tools at our disposal restricts our ability to raise revenue. The other consideration that I spoke to earlier is the issue about how we deal with this whole model of sustainability, and I think the point you made is valid. We got to find a way to ensure that we're setting aside money to be able to fund whatever development we're proposing. So this is not, you know, at the last SIC meeting I spoke about us not thinking about it here and the now, but looking 10, 15 years from now and what kind of community we want to build and what kind of financially sustainable model we want to put in place to ensure that the municipality has the resources to fund the growth that we're experiencing. One of the things we talked about 2 weeks ago was the issue about rebalancing the residential, commercial, industrial tax base. So we have a more sustainable way of redistributing taxes rather than having all the increase shifting towards the residential taxpayer. So the short answer is limited number of tools. We've got to use those tools judicially. Secondly, how we allocate growth and where that growth and how that growth is spent is really important. Do we assume every year that the growth will go towards reinvestment, or should that growth go towards reducing the tax burden on ratepayers? And that's a decision that I think council would have to make. And finally, when you're thinking long term, one has to think about having a sustainable model to ensure that, you know, we either pay now or pay later. You know, it's probably better and perhaps more prudent to spread that expenditure over a long period of time rather than having it, because capital expenditures, you know, is quite lumpy, and that lumpiness is not often easily accommodated by taxpayers. So as staff, I think we've got to be able to smoothen that lumpiness as we look to the next 10, 15 years as to what the needs are of the municipality. So that's a long-winded answer, but I think it does get to the very core of how we do budgeting and how we plan for any significant capital expenditure beyond the immediate horizon.
So if I summarize through your worship, then it's not closing the door, but leaving it open for opportunities, so we have that ability to do it.
That's correct.
With all of our tools.
Yeah.
Okay. Next, if I may, Mayor Saunderson. So, I guess, I mean, we're doing a lot of work in investigating about the proceeds from the utility and the airport moving forward, and I think that absolutely those proceeds in one way or another have to help the municipality achieve the goals that we're highlighting in our discussion today that will impact the budget. And financial sustainability is impacted by every decision we make, just not spending, but in our policies and planning. And so I guess my question would be, is it a consideration going forward to invest that 18 to 20 million, whatever is going to be there, for a short time period as we move through a couple of budgets or the budget process to have an understanding of how the bigger picture is with advice from an investor? Is that something we could put into the mix?
Yes, I will pass it over to the CAO, but I would comment, because I know I've had a number of discussions with people around the table that we have to do a refresh on the community-based strategic plan. That really is our roadmap on the ground. The discussion, the public discussion about how we will be utilizing, investing the proceeds from the sales is also going to be an ongoing, and this is not something we're rushing into. So I think the short answer is yes, but I'll pass it over to the CAO.
Thank you again, Your Worship. To Councillor Jeffrey, we've had lots of discussions around the senior management table about how we potentially spend the surplus, and I think with fair degree of unanimity, we all agree that this has to be strategic and it's got to be legacy projects. I don't think we're looking at spending this money on projects that can be accommodated as part of our normal budgetary process. And I think we're looking forward to getting council's perspective as well as perspective from the public. We also had discussion, at least Treasurer and I, about getting a third party to provide us with some advice on how this money could be invested in the short term in a way that secures our investment. So in other words, we're not looking at any investment that's too risky while we're doing a consultation, because it is my view that I don't think we'll get to a decision maybe in 6 months or so, or maybe a year. And I think rather than having that money sitting in an account somewhere, we should get some advice on how that money can be invested. Even if we get to a decision in 6 months, I don't think we'll spend the entire proceeds in one fell swoop or in 1 year. So I think we should be investing that money in a way that is responsible and that will generate some revenue while we are deliberating on how that money can best be spent.
Thank you. So moving along,
Okay.
unless somebody else has something else. So the report refers to the lack of order project priority that can occur chasing grant money or other revenues. And the current thrust of federal funding right now, the province, who knows, is AMP and infrastructure investment and green innovation, to name a few. So these seem to be in our wheelhouse and the things that I see coming out of our senior staff in terms of moving forward. So my question is, does this infer that the municipality needs to be in a better place to have shovel-ready projects for its priorities? Does the municipality seek out every possible dollar available through FCM, AMO, and additional sources of other revenue for its projects?
I'll direct that through to the treasurer.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Jeffrey, yes, we do seek out, and actually we succeed a lot in getting the grants, the FCMs, and the OSIP application funds. And as you well know, we've had roughly $9 million in grant funding over the last term of council. What it does mean is that, yes, maybe having those shovel-ready projects would be a good thing out there. What I guess more along the lines of what I kind of meant about that comment was that we might be able to apply for funding for a sewer project that is on a road that we might not totally be ready to repave, or we might get funding for asphalt repavement on a road that really needs to have the water and the sewer redone underneath them and all of the other infrastructure. So it could just lead us to make a choice that we should have just waited another year and did the whole project at once.
Okay, then, and to build on that then through you, Mayor Saunderson, so are there unused gas tax funds on hand, or do we use them in their entirety every year for projects?
Through you, Your Worship, we do have some federal gas tax funds on hand, but we're using last year's budget for the bus terminal because they're covered 100%. We do purchase, I believe Brian has 1 or 2 new buses in the capital budget this year that'll be using the federal gas tax funds. We've used them for things like the turning lanes. We can use them when we do Lockhart and here in Ontario. We do on average we do have some left over every year, but we then find a bigger project that we can apply it to after we do have some money saved up.
Okay, thank you. And if I could carry on then through you, So the report also referred to the Hume Street project, and maybe I was looking at maybe a bigger picture, but the report didn't refer to how much was leveraged saving future tax dollars and municipal debt by having a 2/3 contribution. So with 1/3 from the feds and 1/3 from the province, moving forward, whether that was in order of priority or not, it put us in a position where we had another, whatever 2/3 of that project available for future projects and or to service debt to do more major ones. So was that the gist of that comment in the report through you to the treasurer? Thank you.
Marjorie?
Through you, your worship, actually, using the Hume Street project as the example was to just show that what we should have been doing since we did complete that project is reserving $135,000 a year just for the road surface. That didn't include the base or the sidewalks or any of those things. However, at the time that we did do the Hume Street project, interest rates on the debentures were a lot lower, so we could definitely calculate what the savings was based on completion of that project.
Okay, and then I think lastly, the BMA report refers to the relative age of the town's assets. So I think you may have covered this under the discussion of asset consumption ratio on page 15. If assets are renewed and replaced in accordance with an asset management plan, a high rate should not be of concern. And then also on page 15, contingency reserves recommended are 5 to 15%, and Collingwood was at 13.6% in 2018. So my questions were, does this not suggest that our AMP is working, or maybe it doesn't? And does this not suggest that maybe our reserves are in good shape, or maybe they're not? I was just wondering. Thank you, Your Worship.
Did you want answers to those questions?
Yes, please.
Marjorie?
Through you, your worship. These, the assets that we're talking about here in terms of the consumption ratio include both the water and the wastewater. Those two items are non-tax supported. So in terms of whether there's a high or a low consumption ratio there, and I know the rates come out of the same pocket as the taxes, but it's probably not as visible. I would hesitate to say that. In terms of the tax-supported assets, I think we have some that are probably pretty tired, that really do need the money invested in them. So that's the one that I would kind of look at it in terms of whether we're good or bad. It would be the ones on the tax-supported assets. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
It does, thank you. And then I would just close, if you could, my questions with just a comment. So I really hope that going forward with the budget process and our decision specifically to the pay to go, that we keep all of these lenses in mind. I know we're receiving letters from residents. They're already paying high water costs, high wastewater costs. The municipality is playing catch up and paying for maintenance and upkeep not looked after during almost 2 decades of no tax increases some time ago, while paying for today's needs and reserving for tomorrow's needs as legislated. So it's a serious burden that we're building for a community desperate for a break, especially our families and seniors. So going forward, I'll be keeping my eye on the ways that we can finally show them, after all this hard work and doing really well in other areas, that maybe they can have the benefit of some of that good work.
Point well taken. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Are there any other comments or questions before we put this to Deputy Mayor Hall?
Thank you. Through you to the CAO. Thought for another day, but a question specific to a comment you made. Municipalities do have limited resources, or not resources, but avenues to generate resources. Did the previous council or at the staff level, has there been any discussion around a tourism accommodation tax that's being implemented elsewhere?
CAO.
Through your worship to the deputy mayor, yes, we did actually. We looked at an accommodation tax, and we had a good, robust conversation around the department heads table, and if it's a will of council, we can bring some of that recommendations to council's attention for a discussion. I think the one caution I would posit is the need for us to look at sort of both sides of the ledger, and the attractiveness of an accommodation tax is that it spreads the burden around, which is, I think, is a good thing. So it's not residents who necessarily have to bear the full brunt of the services we provide. It's people who are visiting us, and to Councillor Hamlin's point, because we have so many visitors in the summer and winter, it helps to sort of spread that cost around and result in some additional revenue. The way we left it at the staff level was that we were going to do a canvassing across Ontario to see who has it and who doesn't, and see whether or not municipalities that are typically similar to ours have implemented such a tax, but we have had a discussion.
Just on that note, I have been watching with interest the municipality specific to the town of Huntsville, or the town of Huntsville in which it falls within. And I believe theirs comes into effect April 1 of this year. And so I'm more than happy to park it outside of the context of the budget, but it would be interesting to bring it back at a later date for further discussion.
Through you, Your Worship, I mean, I think there's nothing here that preempts council from wanting to include it as part of the 2019 budget either. So if you're so inclined, I mean, something we can look at.
The only reason I'm more than happy to sort of maybe park it, but I'd leave it to your discretion, would be just that I think it was something that it was a year and a half worth of work to bring it to fruition. But there is perhaps an opportunity to have an initial conversation to see if it's worth the will of council versus the other.
Absolutely, we can take that into consideration. Any other questions, comments, council, around the table? Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you very much.
If no one else is going to say anything, I will let Kathy Jeffrey speak.
It is committee, not
Okay,
council.
all right.
Just before we call for a vote, do we need an amendment to that recommendation? Have we reworded the recommendation, or?
Yes, that was my next question to you. Given the comments that we've heard around the table, if you would consider as the mover amending it to accept the report for information and refer the approval of the recommendations to future budget deliberations. Is that something you're comfortable with?
Thank you.
And I think Councillor Doherty, you seconded it. Is that something you're comfortable with?
Second, yes.
Good. So unless there's any specific comments on the change of the amendment, then I will call the vote. All in favor? And that's the real opposed? Anyone? No? Okay. And that's the real vote, so done at that time. Next item is,
Your Worship,
yes.
I know it's a little late in the agenda, but if we would consider a possible change of the agenda to move, there's a gentleman here who's been deputized wishing to present, and given the length of our discussions, I wonder if we would consider moving that deputation up.
Sure. What item was it that?
I
Did you
believe
want
there's
to move
Mr. Jowett here who would like to speak on a waterfront matter, and I think he was deputized to present, if I'm correct.
Okay. So my understanding, this is a committee meeting, so we can certainly hear a deputation. Unless there's a question or comment from staff, I'm quite prepared to invite Mr. Jowett up to speak to the waterfront item. Come on up, Dave.
Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, councillors, staff members. My name is Bing Jowett, as most of you probably know. I'd like to make a presentation today. This is what you call an old man's video. Thank you very much for interrupting there. I'm here today as the co-founder of our municipal marine coalition. representing over 800 people. Speaking on two subjects here today. You know, after 4 previous plans, over 40 years, dating back to 1975, on November 16th, our prior council approved and adopted our new strategic waterfront master plan. The main part of that plan indicates Collingwood would have a total of 7 spine docks, or a total of 140 in overall total eventually. Each of those spine docks would accommodate 20 boats. As of last fall, with our most recent purchase, we will now have a total of 52. By comparison, Thornbury has 250, Meaford has 200, Port Elgin has 300. You can see where we stand in the whole total in competition. Going back to April 2013, our town purchased 400 feet of first-class head dock, which is the red in the reference sheet there, which had cost of over $400,000. This was to accommodate 2 new spine docks and two in the future. The yacht club, under agreement, acquired the unused space and requested another 100 feet to be added on. The main point here is now that the CYC has moved back to their own basin, we now have 200 feet of vacant dock, which is the orange area that you see there. Therefore, we are requesting that this committee and council make provision in an early spring budget to purchase 2 new spine docks to accommodate as many people on this waiting list and make use of that unused head dock. If an order was placed today, the earliest delivery we could get would be the middle of July. The expenditure of each one of these docks is $600,000. Note, in doing the math, these slips at the appropriate rental rate of $1,000 to $1,500 each would have a payback in 5 to 6 years. And that's with no increase in staff. The transient boating industry has also a very strong economical benefits to draw tourists to our area. Is there any questions on that so far?
Well, finish your presentation, Bing, and then we'll go around the table. Thanks.
The second point on my facilities is the facilities as far as the washroom. My family and I have been boating in Georgian Bay and the Great Lakes for over 60 years. As you may know, Collingwood is one of the finest natural harbors in the Great Lakes, bar none. But Collingwood can also attest to having the worst harbor toilet facilities in Georgian Bay. They're descriptible. While questioning this over the years, I've been told if we upgrade the washroom facilities in this area, in the launching area, to those similar that we use for special occasions, they would have to be installed over all the other park systems. I do not understand this as a correct view in our opinion. The justification, in fact, to my opinion, is the fact that we are collecting thousands of dollars for mooring, launching, in addition to the transient fees in this location. If the town was going to eventually have a good marine facilities, we should start getting some of the very basics correct now. And that's a good washroom facilities. Although many of you may not be a boater, these upgrade requirements are in the real world. Remember, the last thing you do before you get on the boat is go to the washroom. The first thing you do when you get off the boat is go to the washroom. That's not standard fact of life. And I don't want to harp any further on it, but I think we have to take a strong look at the most beneficial natural resource we've got, and that's our harbor. We've all got this strategic waterfront master plan on our books. We're all looking towards it. But let's start with some basic things and get on with life with it. You don't have to worry about the sewer and water down to the grain elevator yet. That's a different project altogether. The grain elevator is a different project. But with Dean's help, we finally got safety ladders down there. It took 10 years to get those because somebody cut them off. It took 10 years to get life rings down there because we destroyed them. This past November, somebody stole a $1,000 table down off one of the docks. It was bolted down and it was never reported. These are the type of things we've got to start looking at this harbor. It's like I said before, it's one of the finest in the province of Ontario. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Bing. Any questions or comments, Council? Councillor Hamlin.
I just, I'm in support of your general idea of making.
Sorry, my ears.
Yours, okay. I'll try and yell a bit more. How's that? I'm in general support of having our harbor more attractive to transient boaters and even to our own residents. But I didn't understand the numbers that you were asking, how many docks and what the cost was.
We're talking 2 docks, 2 spine docks, and the cost is around $500,000 a piece.
And how many slips?
560,000, pardon me.
Okay. And how many slips is that?
2.
2 boats.
Oh, would accommodate for 40 boats.
40 boats. Okay, thank you. Those are my questions through your worship. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Bing.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Councillor Coley.
Yes, I wanted to thank Mr. Jawa as well for coming today and know that he has the support of council, most of council, and concerns about the waterfront. Maybe we could allow Director Culver just to respond in particular to the spine docks and the status, if that's all right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Bing. I think we'll leave that for budget discussions,
Okay.
Councillor Coley.
So we'll take that up again at budget discussions.
Pardon?
Your concern for the docks will come up again at further deliberation, all right? Thank you so much.
Okay, so going back then to our agenda, we're at item 5.2, T 2019-03, Council Remuneration. Is that, Madam Treasurer, is that you again, please?
I don't have a presentation for this one, Your Worship, but for the streaming, you're supposed to. On March 22nd, 2017, when delivering the 2017 federal budget, the Minister of Finance introduced measures to eliminate tax exemptions for non-accountable expense allowances paid to elected officials. The budget indicated that this was an advantage that other Canadians did not enjoy. So that measure became effective on the 1st of January of 2019. And in effect, the changes were that elected officials no longer receive a 1/3 tax-free exemption, and they will begin, or they have begun, I guess, a little late, to pay income tax on their full salary. You're also required to pay Canada pension on the full salary, whereas the 1/3 tax-free last time you didn't have to. And the one thing they did give you was that in lieu of the 1/3 exemption, you'd be able to deduct eligible employment expenses like local travel, office supplies, etc. But it does create a lot of extra work for the council members because you have to track it now. So at this point in time, what is happening based on this elimination, the mayor's net take home is actually $3,900 or 12% less. The deputy mayor loses $2,600 or 11.5%. And council members see a decrease in their net pay of almost $2,900 or 15.5%. And the change also produced anyway an increase to the town of $14,445 because we're also paying the other half of your Canada pensions. We lose the HST exemption that we used to be able to claim on your 1/3 non-taxable amounts. The other point is that the council remuneration has not been reviewed since 2009. We have adjusted it annually by the same cost of living allowance as the non-union staff have received. We believe that the remuneration for elected officials should be fair and reasonable to both council and the citizens of the town of Collingwood. An appropriate remuneration should achieve the following goals. It should reflect the nature, responsibilities, and accountability associated with these positions. It should demonstrate fiscal responsibility, and it should attract strong, qualified candidates to local government. So today, council members are more accessible and expected to be more responsive than ever before. Technology and the expansion of social media allows members of the public to contact you night and day and through a variety of channels. For many of you, I know that the job has become 24/7, even if they're only compensated at a part-time volunteer level. Staff feel that the current council should be kept financially whole with their predecessors, meaning that the net pay today should be the same as that of the prior council. Staff recommend an increase in the gross remuneration of council members to achieve the end result. And the mayor would receive an increase of $5,600. The deputy mayor would receive an increase of almost $3,800, and council members would receive increases of $2,750. So that the cost to the town for these increases would be $28,300. And I know there may be no more awkward task for a municipal council than determining its own level of compensation. There are many important practical, financial, philosophical, and political considerations with the debates being driven by voter outrage, citizen backlash, and politicians wanting to avoid the perception of giving themselves a raise. However, I do believe, and staff do believe, that this is a unique situation created through the elimination of that 1/3 exemption, and it does put our current council at a disadvantage in relation to previous councils. So in addition to recommending that we increase council remuneration to compensate for their loss, we'd also like to include market review of the comparative municipalities that is to be taken, it should be undertaken every 4 years. We're getting ready to do one this year, but we're just a little year late. And that would be done in conjunction with the reviews for the non-union employees, and that will, as I say, occur this year. And that we would recommend that council would continue to receive the same cost of living increase as all of the non-union staff do. In 2019, that we've included in the budget is a 1.9%.
Thank you, Marjorie. Before I get this put on the table, I will look to the gallery to see if there's anyone in the public who would like to make any comments about this item. Seeing none, then the recommendation is that staff report T 2019-3 is received for information. The council approves the recommendations contained herein. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Hamlin. Questions, comments, council? Councillor McLeod.
Through you, your worship, to Treasurer Leonard. Thank you for that report. And thank you for acknowledging that that there are cranky critics out there who have things to say about politicians giving themselves a raise. Could you please explain to me how much of a pay cut our re-elected incumbents will be facing if we make no change to the remuneration?
If you make no change to the remuneration, they'll be in the same position that you are in. Had we compared it to the 2018 council, they would still be under that 2,750. I mean, the alternative is that you go the route of claiming your expenses employment expenses, so you track your mileage and meals and all of those types of things. They'd be in the same, the next council would be in the same spot.
Through you, your worship. So I'm looking at some numbers here that suggest that a councillor who was serving at this table between 2014 and 2018, and that same councillor serving at this table from 2018 to 2022, if there were no change to the remuneration that the town has decided to do, they would face a pay cut of about $2,500 a year. Is that what I'm seeing on this chart?
That would, through you, your worship, yes, it would be roughly a $2,500 reduction in what the previous council member would have made to you.
Thank you.
I guess if I could just pick up on that, phrased another way, the proposed increases are actually going to allow this council to tread water. In other words, to receive the same post-income benefit that we would have under the previous council. So there's no actual net increase. Any other questions or comments, council? Councillor Coleman.
I'd just like to say I appreciate the treasurer's comments about the extent of the workload that's put forth by all council members, of course, as well as staff. And I think if any resident or anyone would like to offer comment on the remuneration, I think they'd be quite surprised by the numbers that they saw. So I'd like to thank her for offering those comments, especially in the age of social media and digital access. It is quite a workload. Thank you.
Seeing no other questions or comments, I will call the vote then. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried.
Could I have a recorded vote, please?
I've had a request for a recorded vote, and we can do that after the fact, so I'll pass that over to the clerk.
Certainly, all those in favor of the motion, please rise. You may be seated. All those opposed, please rise. So noted. Motion is carried.
Next item on the agenda, 5.3, T 2019-05, pre-budget approval for 2018 carryover capital project. To Treasurer Leonard.
This all just go back to the podium.
Yes, please. Treasurer.
Am I good to go, Krista, this time? Okay. Staff are requesting some pre-budget approval for capital projects. These projects were approved in the 2018 budget, but they're not being completed until 2019. Section 290 of the Municipal Act requires a municipality to prepare and adopt a budget annually. And if a budget contains multi-year data, Section 291(4) requires that the budget be reviewed annually and readopted. So the interpretation of these sections is that any project approved in a prior year and not completed must be included in the subsequent year's budget and reapproved. So what we have is the following capital projects that like they're in the 2018 capital budget, and they're fully funded through various reserve and reserve funds. And pre-approval of these projects will not affect the draft budget that will be presented today. We have some light-duty vehicles. This time around, our fleet and facilities managers recommended some compact crossover SUVs that are hybrid, green in nature. So building will be getting one. It's covered through their permit fees. Water and wastewater funded through the rates. Public Works will get one, and it's funded through the Public Works Reserve. There's one four-wheel drive pickup for water, which again is funded through the rates. We have a 1-ton truck with a dump box, I believe it is, for PRC, and that's funded through DCs and a 10% non-growth related reserve fund. Heavy equipment, we're gonna get our light-duty garbage truck after 4 years in the budget, and it's shared 50-50 between Public Works and Parks, and again, it's funded through DCs and the 10% non-DC growth-related reserve. Public Works has some heavy equipment requests, the sanitary sewer flusher truck, a plow truck, 2 sidewalk plows, and all of those purchases are gonna be funded through the Public Works Reserve. And they'd like to buy, or go to tender for a 1 sidewalk plow that would be fully funded through development charges. We have our accessible transit bus that's gonna be funded through the federal gas tax monies. And the town hall is actually going to get a little bit of a masonry facelift, and that's funded through the general reserve. The Black Ash Creek wastewater pumping station, the upgrade there will be fully funded through rates. So again, some of these projects were initiated in 2018 via tender, however, they didn't close until 2019. So in terms of the vendors, there's a reasonable expectation that they'll be awarded, and perhaps waiting for the complete budget approval could be problematic with some of the terms that were in the tenders. That would be that, Your Worship.
All right, are there any comments from the public? Seeing none, then I will put the matter recommendation on the table. Recommend that the council authorize the pre-budget procurement of the capital budget items as outlined in this report. Again, mover and seconder. Councillor Hamlin, Councillor Berman. Councillor, questions or comments? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. Through you to the treasurer. So just to confirm, all of these items would be accounted for, paid for out of 2018 budget.
Through you, Your Worship, yes, those funds are carried forward into 2019,
Okay.
so they're all funded, yes.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we get into our big ticket item, 5.4, 2019 budget overview, public engagement and timeline. Treasurer Leonard.
Every year, municipalities prepare a budget, and that budget is the blueprint that defines how resources are collected and allocated. Every town program and service is funded through the operating budget. To keep Collingwood both affordable and prosperous, staff need to determine how best to deliver these services while balancing the revenues and expenditures. Town infrastructure is funded through the capital budget. The bulk of that funding goes to maintaining and rehabilitating existing infrastructure and expanding infrastructure to accommodate growth. In order to balance the budget, a careful analysis must be done regarding the level of service required to meet expectations of the community, balanced against realistic taxation and user fee levels. For the first budget of this term of council, the focus has been based on the goals of the community-based strategic plan. The accountable local government, public access to a revitalized waterfront, support for economic growth, healthy lifestyle, culture, and the arts. I believe that these goals, or this focus, will continue after the refresh of the plan. How we achieve them may change. Departmental presentations will explain how the proposed 2019 budget addresses pressures on operations, such as the changing legislative requirements. Public Works is under minimum maintenance standards for roads, sidewalks, and even the illumination on traffic signs, which was something I wasn't really aware of. We have the asset management plans and infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act, which, as Councillor Hamlin mentioned earlier, does require us to have the strategic asset management policy in place by the 1st of July this year. The growth funding and maintaining infrastructure. Since December the 1st, 2014, the last term of council, the town has seen significant growth, and there really are no signs of this stopping. At this point, the one thing I would like to caution council is that the number of new dwelling unit permits issued does not translate immediately into increased assessment base. In some instances, there can be a lag of 2 to 3 years before MPAC has the property assessment added to our property base. And in particular, that can happen with condominiums because the assessment for a condominium is not added to the tax base until the condominium is registered. We did have the case I mentioned last year where occupancy occurred in 2017. The condominium itself was registered 2 days after the certified roll was closed, so they didn't get on the tax roll for till January of 2018. So it's one of the reasons why we do have a little higher supplementary tax amount this year. And again, pressures to provide the same level of service to all taxpayers, and that includes the new growth. We have to make sure that we're servicing them in the same way. If we need 300 more spots in the harbor, I guess we need 300 more spots. We have mandated timeframes for processing various applications and requests and payments. So based on the MPAC household count figures, we've added about 1,168 households. Again, this reflects only the increase in the number of households that MPAC has assessed and included on the tax roll. 2019 has been estimated as an addition of another 380 households. So the estimated growth in population is 3,232 persons, or a 15.7% increase since 2014. That translates into a 15.7% increase in the use of roads, sewers, water, parks, recreation facilities, administrative personnel, that one in there. With the exception of the addition of the water department staff in 2016 and the replacement of contracted IT services with in-house staffing, staffing equivalents have increased 13.25% since 2014, or 7.36%. The 2019 budget includes requests for an additional 4.7 FTEs, potentially bringing our total to 22.4 or 12.5% over the 5-year period. And just a little note that if the service enhancements are approved, staffing equivalents would increase to 15.9 or 8.84%. And department heads will provide counsel with the impacts of growth on their ability to keep up with their service demands for their department during their major presentations on Thursday. Did I hit the one? Okay, I did. So what I'm about to present is a high-level overview of the numbers, and my colleagues will be providing a brief summary of their departmental budgets. They will share accomplishments, pressures, and what to look for in their 2019 budgets. These presentations are not designed to be the lead into a fulsome discussion today, but rather to set the stage in a broad contextual manner. The more detailed deliberations will be provided at the next SIC meeting. This is the proposed budget, and as you can see, the operating expenses are projected to increase $3.2 million from 55.8 to 59 million. And our capital, which again, as our CIO referred to, is a lumpy part of the budget. It's going to get a little lumpy this year. It's going to increase 6.8 million to 33.8 million overall. Our funding resources, for the most part, we show an overall increase in the funding from development charges, and that's 4.7 million, and an increase in the funding from reserves and reserve funds of 4.2 million. The amount required from property taxes is it's an increase of $600,000. So the operating budget, general government will take 16% of the pie, fire and police 9% each, transportation 15%, PRC 11%, planning and development, library services, and the capital levy are 3% each. Other is 2%, and non-tax supported services will use 29%. In the capital budget, non-tax supported services will use 55%, transportation 22%, PRC 16%, and the remaining 7% will be split between other, fire, and general government. This is a pretty small slide, but this is the summarized preliminary budget. You actually have copies of these in both of the large binder, and you have a detailed one that shows it to you by the department, the breakdown of the sub-departments within those in the small book. Staff have prepared all budget documents based on the proposed levy of $31,578,627, which is an increase in the levy for the total spending in the municipality of 1.92% over the 2018 level. Our inflation and unavoidable increases incorporate the increases related to the contract settlements from 2018 and a cost of living increase for non-union staff equal to the QP increase of 1.9%. Growth-related increases are those increases that are necessary due to the pressures of serving more people but maintaining the same expected level of service. The effect on the average property owner, our average residential assessment this year is $314,595. The average phase-in assessment increase is $9,789. What I'm going to show you only considers the town portion of the tax dollars. I have not included the 7.75% capital levy. But that a dollar amount for the average residential property for the capital levy is $17.42. So the effect on the average property, the tax rate is actually a 4.72% decrease. And at this rate, the 2018 actual taxes would have been $22.38. Our proposed 2019 taxes are $22.01, or a decrease to the taxpayer of approximately $37.24. So what I have presented is an executive summary of your budget package. The full budget presentations will allow for deputations, public input during discussions, and answers to questions from council and the public. These budget documents, which you did receive last week, I believe, contain the draft budget book. We've provided this year a supplementary information booklet that does include explanations of the inflation and unavoidable increases, what the growth-related increases are. We've also included service enhancements, which in prior years we used to refer to as the unmet needs. And I've also given you the tax scenarios that we have prepared this year. One of them is the $37 savings, and there were a few others that we will discuss at the next meeting. The next steps, we have scheduled the SIC meeting for Thursday, March the 7th. To be held in the community rooms B and C of the library, starting at 10 a.m. And it will be the full budget presentations and deliberations will begin. Public input and comments are welcomed throughout the meeting. We have scheduled an SIC meeting for Thursday, March 14th in the council chambers beginning at 4 p.m. to continue deliberations. This meeting we did similar last year. We had a 2-hour meeting where we did a short presentation, and then we finished off the budget departments that we didn't get to in the first part. And we broke for coffee with council to mingle with the public. And then we went back into a formal public meeting to allow for additional public input and any comments that council wanted or anything like that. And we're looking at March 25th as the tentative date for the adoption of the budget. Through you, Your Worship, now I believe we'll have the quick departmental, three slides each for the departments in 5 minutes.
Right. What I might do, Marjorie, just before you sit down is invite comments from the public if there's any comments on Marjorie's higher level budget plan, and if not, then I think I'll open it to questions from council on the specifics that you've just told us so far. Council, any questions or comments for Marjorie on the presentation so far? Councillor Comey.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to hear about the outreach to the public through your worship. I was just curious, how will we share that information with the public, that they're welcome to come, the coffee with the councillor that will follow is the process?
What we have scheduled for the newspaper, the website, the social medias that we have here, that we will put all of that information out, and I believe we can advertise on the radio as well to get the coffee for council out. Mayor Saunderson could advertise that on his.
We can take that up with chat, so we'll be with me this week, so, yes.
Thank you.
All right, Marjorie, thanks very much. So I don't know who's first up.
Clerks.
Clerks. No, we don't talk about it. For yourself, right?
All right. Through your worship to members of council and my committee right now. As Marjorie indicated, our presentations today are short and sweet. So clerk services budget includes our bylaw enforcement and parking. So we were asked to break it down into 3 components. So the first one is our accomplishments from 2018. So here are some of our highlights from last year. Of course, we undertook the preparation of the conduct of the 2018 municipal election. We also did the enhancement of our corporate meeting management system and web portal, which we're continuing to enhance. And we started at the end of last summer the corporate website development process. So we're hoping that that's nearing completion as we speak, and hopefully we'll have something to council within the next couple of weeks. For bylaw enforcement, we've responded to 1,723 occurrences or cases. We've actually, sorry I missed the number, actually included in this one, prosecutions for 2018 was 88 prosecutions. So that again is, there's one court meeting that is set aside each month. So we average on each court date approximately 8 prosecutions that we manage. So whether that's on behalf of or together with our fire department, whether it's with any of our other enforcement divisions, including our building inspection areas, or whether it's our regulatory bylaws, including parking, animal control, or noise requirements. We also completed the Coyote Management Communication Plan, and we're actually in the process right now of preparing our next public consultation or public awareness session on coyote management. 'Tis the season. Next, the research and consultation with cannabis was primarily led through our department, and then the last component was completed with the grateful assistance of planning services and marketing business development. And with respect to parking, we undertook the initial stage of our RFP for the mobile parking technology and electric vehicle charging station RFP. So that's something that actually is going to be put out there in the very near future, subject to, again, further budget approval from council, and again, the repair and replacement of our aging parking equipment and infrastructure. Our next slide actually highlights some of the budget pressures, and as mentioned earlier, some of these pressures are both positive and negative pressures. You know, looking at the alignment that we're undertaking, the very first one is regarding the enhancement of our service levels for customer service. So this actually will prove to provide actually some budget efficiencies as well, because during the review, we're looking at a number of budget opportunities and funding opportunities through the province for a customer service type kiosk. We're looking at having our customer service ambassadors undertake more work right up front at the counter level. So an example of that change will be, we're actually appointing them as commissioners of oath. So that will again alleviate some of the pressures that we have within clerk services as well. So we're looking forward to that change. We're always impacted by legislative changes, so some significant changes happened and actually just came into force in effect on March the 1st, 2019 with respect to the accountability and transparency initiatives. So that now adds a budgetary requirement on the imposition of the integrity commissioner services for also our boards and committees, which wasn't in place before for boards and committees. It was just in place for council. So that's something new that I will be able to undertake, as well as that integrity commissioner provides advice to those board members. So there could be an increased cost associated with that we're definitely going to be monitoring this year. Another change is the Safer Ontario's Act, which is something significant that municipalities will be required to undertake within the next 2 years regarding putting together a community and well-being safety plan. So that will be a significant component too moving forward, as well as some pressures have been the coordination of some significant files. So we're looking forward to completing a number of those significant files. We do have a few that are ongoing. So again, the judicial inquiry we're monitoring as part of our customer service review as well for 2019 is the commissioning services, which will be interesting, and looking at our licensing that we undertake. And then one of the areas there include our lottery licensing and then our food vendor licensing as well. So pressures within our bylaw enforcement are pretty self-explanatory with regards to growth and demands and expectations. But one of the significant areas that we've been struggling with, as can be attested by our HR department as well as my neighboring colleagues, on how their crossing guard program staffing and recruitment requirements for it. It is a significant undertaking. Again, it's something that we're also hoping will come up in the regional review. It might be a small piece to some people, but within the number of requirements of our officers having to go out to undertake crossing guard and the absentee of our crossing guards that may have an appointment or be sick or including general vacancies, I should say, as well. Then again, as I previously indicated, we have increased resource requirements for court appearances and prosecutions. There is quite a lot of work that's required for the coordination piece for various prosecutions that we have to undertake, including trials that we have to go before. So that is something that's managed within the bylaw department currently. And some pressures with respect to parking include our ongoing meter maintenance and replacement. Obviously, if we have more snow that occurs every winter, the cost and pressures of snow removal on our budget multiply. The use of municipal parking lots for special events also causes some fluctuation in our ability to raise money for our parking reserves, as well as increased demand on officer time responding to other bylaws. And moving forward, some of our highlights for 2019, we've actually kept pretty quiet programs for 2019. We want to make sure that we get ahead of the line on a number of our enhancements for accountability and transparency, as well as ensuring that our implementation of our meeting management system stays on course, and then looking at the new realignment once council considers that at the next council meeting on where we move forward from there. With bylaw enforcement, we're continuing to update and amend town bylaws, enhance public education, and develop a municipal bylaw enforcement policy, including standard operating guidelines. This has been something that's new that a lot of municipalities are taking a look at, primarily because the number of officers and the demands, the number of officers are basically staying pretty consistent, and the number of demands are increasing every year. So this is something where municipalities have started looking at regarding the number of complaints and how complaints are handled. So that's something that the bylaw department will be working with, whatever department that they're aligned with, as well as parking. We're looking at a new comprehensive parking bylaw and we're preparing a request for proposal to replace the aging parking meter equipment. And we're working on a project together with our marketing business development and PRC for a meter shelter as well as a welcome kiosk. So those are some of the highlights for 2019.
Thank you, Sarah. Just before you leave, are there any questions, council? Seeing none, then we'll move on to the next department.
In 2018, Finance centralized the invoicing and accounts receivable function, which does allow us to have improved control over the accounts and the accounting. We prepared a 5-year capital plan, which was adopted by council, and we successfully uploaded the roads, water, wastewater, and bridge condition assessment information into the WorkTech asset management model and prepared modeling reports for the asset management plan. Budget pressures, strategic financial planning emphasis in particular for the asset management plans and sustainability. The asset management plans and the pressures to meet the milestones, which we will meet. Federal and provincial reporting requirements and pressures to meet the deadlines there as well. And one of the problems that we kind of ran into this year is that we were not able to provide adequate resources to departments for assistance with developing their budgets at the time they needed the help. And for 2019, the emphasis will be on the strategic asset management policy. We have started and are working towards the tight timelines that we now have for the development charges background study. And we're going to continue to work on the asset management plan so that we're ready to comply with the July 1st, 2021 core asset amounts there. There are some areas within the conditions that we still need to finish up. So, and that's what we're going to be doing this year. And doesn't sound like much, but it's a lot.
Marjorie, stay there. Any comments or questions, council? Because I have a comment. And I know it follows on the heels of the discussion that Councillor Jeffrey had with the CAO, and you were part of that. But the whole strategic financial planning piece seems to be fairly critical. We're at kind of a critical juncture right now with the stresses we're undergoing in our community and potential revenues coming in, but that's a one-time opportunity, and we have to look at how we do that moving forward. And the idea of sustainability too, I think, is starting to take on many different meanings. It just doesn't mean balancing the books. We're looking at green development. We're looking at socially responsible planning moving forward so our infrastructure is maximized and those sorts of things. So I wanted to first call you out and give you a shout out for picking that out as being one of the priorities moving forward. And then just for council, we did receive from University of Waterloo a blueprint about future sustainability, and I'm going to ask that a copy of this be made available for all council members, because I think it's an interesting read, because we are looking at some very broad topics that will affect the future of our community, and I think considerations are shifting. We need to take a broader focus, I think, in terms of how we look at our future development. That was my comment. I don't know if anyone else has a comment. Councillor Hamlin.
Through you, Your Worship, I just had a question about your slide that mentioned you weren't able to provide adequate assistance from your department to the department heads, and I'm just wondering how do we resolve that?
Through you, Your Worship, this year was a rather unusual year. We had a person off sick for a fair amount of time that we did have a backfill for that. That was the payroll position, and then subsequently that person left. We had 2 retirements, and we did have again backfill for those jobs, but we had to then hire and train the new people. So that's what I meant by it. I'm not, finance isn't asking for any more people this year.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marjorie.
Good afternoon. So for the human resources budget, okay, in 2018, our time was taken up a lot by recruitments. So over 67 job postings, which results in over 100 staff changes. What we did accomplish in 18 was all collective agreements were negotiated and settled. So there were 3 outstanding at the beginning of the year, and so it was a big task to complete all of those. We also facilitated the change to the pay and arrears system for all staff, and that was completed as well in 2018. Budget pressures from the HR portfolio, increased costs for benefits. As with anything, group health benefits costs are going up, but we have got some arrangements with our union groups, and we will be reaching out to our non-union groups as well to see if there's a consolidated common plan design that we can come to that will help find some efficiencies. Any service level changes that council may determine are going to impact staff levels, which means some more activity for the HR department. Staff turnover, there are still some impending retirements coming forward this year, and so all of that recruitment always takes some effort from us. And we're always keeping an eye on legislative changes. So in 2018, for example, the Bill 148, which brought in a bunch of changes, and then subsequently Bill 47, which undid 3/4 of that. But things like the recreational cannabis and the Ministry of Labour Ergonomics Initiative are all things that we are keeping on top of to make sure that we are in compliance. So for 2019, the big projects that we would be looking for this year is the, as Marjorie mentioned previously, compensation review for non-union staff, and we're also proposing to include a compensation review for council. The last time the compensation review was done for non-union staff was in 2013, and ideally we'd like to do it every 4 or 5 years, so we're actually a little bit overdue for that. There's also be more activity depending on what happens with the proposed realignment that council is considering. And our capital request is to be looking for a more flexible and user-friendly performance management system. The system that we're using now is really no longer supported, and both from an administrative viewpoint and from an employee and supervisor viewpoint, it's pretty cumbersome. So we'll be looking for a different system going forward.
Any questions from the public? Seeing none. Council, any questions for Melissa? Thank you very much, Melissa.
You. 2018 was the first full year for IT services in-house. So they accomplished the replacement of 28 servers. I'm not going to talk technical, right? But they did migrate them over to a 4 units about this big. So instead of the large tower, it's gone down to that. We have, they replaced the firewall, and it's been a migration to the next generation firewall, which has a significant threat management features and functionality, and that's because of the ransomware, we need to beef up the security in all areas, and that was where we started. They also had an unplanned project with the judicial inquiry. They had to do the wiring, create a server, update the laptops, prepare all of the printing and those types of things for it. With GIS, we've had a creation of mobile apps for water so that they can do frozen services and in the field and update the GIS system, which then updates our capital asset system as well. Lindsay has done a lot of work with Jennifer Parker in the Healthy Kids at collecting all of the parks, trails, and points of interest, and creating a very interactive app for the new website when it comes out. You can click on it and see that at Riverside Park there's a small children's area here with these amenities. So it's quite nice. They created the Coyote-related GIS database and the public-facing online reporting tool, and she's saved us some money because she's moved all the single-use licenses to concurrent models, and it's about a $1,500 savings per module. So the pressures, we have an increasing need for IT support and guidance with in-house staff being integral components in all software purchases and installations. The CAO requires us to make sure that IT is involved in all software purchases and implementation, and so that we can ensure that integration is there and we're getting the best bang for our buck. And they're in the process of gearing up for the move towards the more customer-centric service model, which is a necessary involvement to build the 21st century organization. However, it will increase the workload until it's up and running, and hopefully it will run itself after that. The key highlights for 2019. Office 365, the Exchange migration. This was recommended by both security studies that we had done last year. This is one very large component of it because it takes it off of our servers and places it in the cloud, so it should be less vulnerable. And again, once we get this done, we're going to follow up with security assessments to measure our progress and catch any new weaknesses that may have evolved over the year that we've been working on this. The disaster recovery site, which they have been working on, they're going to expand it because I believe they've purchased a new unit for additional storage. And there are a large number of desktop and laptops to be refreshed, but they're going to also at the same time go through and determine whether an employee needs a desktop or they need a laptop, and make sure that the funds that are used are optimized in replacements. And in terms of our GIS, they're going to be working on customer-facing applications for planning, building, and PRC. And she'd like to create a GIS governance road plan or a strategic plan. And she wants to continue further development of the mobile workforce for data capture in the field. That's where they're heading next year, so.
Pass it over to the CAO for a few additional comments.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks, Marjorie. The couple of comments just to supplement what Marjorie said. One of the biggest challenges we faced was this whole issue of having the appropriate security in place to ensure that we weren't vulnerable. And I think the firewall that staff have improved will go a long way to reducing our vulnerability. I think we need to continue to monitor that. We've seen our neighbors and others outside of the region having to not only had their security breached, but also were required to pay to retrieve some of that information back. So we're not completely immune from any attack, but I think we're trying to do our best to ensure that we put in place the maximum firewall and security arrangements. The other comment is that we're also looking across the organization at the deployment of software and mobile applications. And I think with the new website, we're going to look at a common interface into the municipality, and also looking at how we can utilize a common app to ensure that there's a one-window access into the municipality. I've also, and Marjorie mentioned this, asked our IT folks to take a look at how we deploy new hardware to ensure that we don't necessarily have to duplicate both desktop and laptop if that's not what's required, but also look at our refresh policy to ensure that the 3 or 4 years provision that we have in place is actually optimize the use of that asset. So there are a few things we're looking on the IT side to try and ensure that we're not necessarily spending resources if we don't have to, in either refreshing or acquiring new software that doesn't optimize what you already have within the organization.
Thank you, Fareed. Any questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, then I'll go around the table. Council, any questions or comments for Marjorie on the IT? Thanks, Marjorie.
Good afternoon. I am not crossbar. He's on a well-deserved holiday and had a very convenient time that he left me with this, but I want to apologize in advance. I probably went a little too far in advance when I found out about this, but I'll try to cut down very quickly for you. I'll be good for Thursday now, though. I'm almost So anyway, for our accomplishments in 18, we updated our establishment and reg and bylaw. It was recommended by our master fire plan. It was presented to council and approved. Our Simcoe County Quality Care Program, we went into partnership with the paramedics to help deliver CPR, first aid, and naloxone administration. It just provides consistent training and better patient care. It was approved by council. We started last April with huge success with it. Our fire dispatch service agreement, it was presented to council, and we got an agreement from 2019 to 2023. Our Community Emergency Management Program Committee annual compliance. We did an addendum to it, and we met our annual compliance with OFMEM for 2018. Our Alarm for Life program, this is where our firefighters go out and we go home to home, check all the residents for working CO smoke alarms, and we did over 1,400 homes last year. Our emergency management training exercise, we completed in November for all primary and alternate members, and we are all BEM certified at this time. Our call volume, now for 2017 we had 751 calls, and in 2018 we had 801. Not that that's accomplishment, but our run times is approximately 5 minutes and 45 seconds, and that is under the standard of about 8 minutes. So we're doing quite well at this time. For 2019, for the pressures and objectives, one pressure that we're going to face in 2019 is the provincial government is introducing legislation that will require mandatory certification in such areas as firefighter. The days of being just come in and want to be a firefighter are long gone. You have to be certified in level 1, level 2. If you want to be a fire officer, you have to be certified. If you want to be an instructor to teach within the fire department, you have to be certified. Educator, investigator, inspector. We were the least regulated industry where we had to be most proficient in so many different areas. That was supposed to come out last year. They're just revamping a little bit, but it will be coming, and it will be a pressure to us. Saying that, we're asking for a training officer in 2019, and it kind of goes hand in hand with what I'm talking about for mandatory certification. We're also having trouble with consistent training between the different shifts with our fire officer doing the training. It's everybody's got a little different way of doing it. And I think this training officer will help in all these aspects. Our fire master plan also recommends that we hire a full-time training officer. This person will do dual roles. He'll do prevention, he can still run the trucks, he can be a safety officer, and plus do all the training. And last but not least, safety. It's my job to make sure the firefighters are safe and they want to come home to their families, and this is the ultimate goal. For technical skills and training certification for 2019, I'm just going to run through a few of them because there's quite a few that we do. This year we're looking at Fire Instructor 1 and 2, Fire Officer 1, 2, 3, and 4, Fire Dynamics, High-Rise Firefighting, Life Safety Educator, Ice Rescue, Fire Inspector 1 and 2, Commercial Cooking, Fire Code, 9 different courses that we're doing, Fire Investigation, Public Information Officer, Courtroom Procedures, Hazmat, Incident Safety Officer, Trench Rescue, Auto X, PTSD Training, Peer Support Program, and Quality Care Program. And there's many more, but that's just for 19. Just a little bit, we're also trying to certify everybody as a public education officer. Our fire master plan recommended that we try to alleviate some pressures on the fire prevention division. So, but again, they all have to be certified. This time we only have 4 people. By the end of this year, I'm hoping for 5 more. And again, that's, it all depends on courses and what's available at the time. Growth within the town. We all know growth is great, but again, our response times are good at this time. We're documenting where the calls are. But as we grow, the calls are going further west, further east, and our response times are gonna, we go all the way out to Mosley Street at the roundabout. So our fire master plan also said to monitor it each year, and you know, someday we will have to look at a satellite station either in the west end or east end. Our emergency management annual compliance. We've always had trouble reaching it because it's so big and so huge, and our summer help, it takes the whole summer just to do all the contacts. So we've actually hired a consultant last year. We're working together. We brought it down to about a third the size, and it will be presented to council later this year. Alarm, actually I'm probably not switching that, aren't I? How do you do that one? Just a minute. How do you do this? Start that one. Alarm for Life pre-planning applications. I already talked to you about the Alarm for Life program. What we're working with is trying to do an app so then all the information can be done on scene. Right now it takes about, after one home, it takes about 30 minutes to document it, put it into our system. We're hoping to work with GIS, and she's already brought it forward, so it's all ready to go. Everything will be on scene with our tablets, iPhone, iPad, and it's zero cost. And we're also doing this for pre-planning. Same thing, we do everything on scene, and when there is a call, our captains can easily pull it up and extract any information on the way to a call. So it's a great program. And our burn permits. We issued 618 burn permits last year. We're hoping to do an online version of it. It's like one-stop shopping. Again, it takes so many hours. We're hoping to save about 300 hours a year by going online. So we're just checking how that would work for us right now. Budget. This is the good part. We have an overall decrease of 24,000, and that's with the training officer included. We would actually have 43,000, but we began 2 new lines, the emergency 911 and emergency planning. So even with those 2 lines and the training officer, we are still 24,000 under last year's budget. You're probably wondering how could that be? That's because we've had so many senior people retire, and they're at the highest wage, and of course you get the entry level. It takes 23 years to get up to that level again, so that's basically how that works on there. On capital, we're looking to replace our 2004 tanker. It's just the consultants said the lifespan is about 15 years, so this is the year that we should be looking into it. On Thursday, I'll go into more detail about that. The cost with the trade-in will be approximately $650,000, or take depending on the dollar and tariffs and that type of thing. And the last thing is we're looking to buy new hydraulic extrication tools. We're just at the end of life on the ones we have. They're hydraulic. We're going to battery operated hydraulics. They're a third of the weight, and they don't affect by cold. They can be, you don't have lines to worry about. And the cost for them is a pair of spreaders, cutters, rams, and airbags, and the cost is about $65,000. And that's about it.
Thank you, Dan. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, council around the table, any questions or comments for the Deputy Chief? No, thanks very much, Dan.
Thank you.
You can tell Ross, you did a great job, and he would have been on the hot seat a lot more. Nancy.
Good afternoon, Mayor Saunderson. So just a little bit about planning and building this year. We had a busy year, and I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. Just to give you an indication, what we've put up is a chart that indicates the number of applications we've dealt with over the past 5 years. And so in 2017, for example, we had 128 applications of the various varieties that we deal with. And in 2018, we had 119. I should point out, just for your interest, when this chart starts at 59, which was 2014, and to be clear, we haven't increased staff over that time. So we do have the same staff load dealing with those applications. What is not included in our chart is things like tree cutting permits. So there are a few other permits that frankly don't fit into our chart. But anyway, this just gives you an idea of what we've been doing over the last several years. The other thing I probably should point out for 2018 is that we were down a staff person for 4 months. We had a lady go on maternity leave, and it took us several months to find a replacement. So for 4 of those months, we were actually down a body. Anyway, so that's basically kept us busy over 2018. I believe we also, well, I'm a planner, I can't help throwing in a map, sorry. It's just, it goes with the territory. This is just a map indicating the areas where we've been working and what we've been doing and what we've been busy on. Obviously, at this kind of scale, you probably can't see a lot of detail, but if there are any questions about what or where the applications have been over the past year, I can certainly answer those. And I guess, so the next thing is really, I mean, that's kind of what we've been up to for 2018, to be honest. Our priorities for 2019, my understanding is that the department's priorities are going to be, first of all, to engage in a refresh of our strategic plan, and we will be key as far as that refresh of that document. It is a very important document in my view, as showing as to what is the priorities for the community and leading the community forward for the next 4 years. The other main project that I believe the department will get involved with in 2019 would be the official plan. Now, I'm not quite sure, based on the letter that came out from the minister, and the minister said that we should perhaps pause some of those planning and studies because of the work that is being done on the Planning Act and the work that is being done on the PPS. So that may be something that we can hold off for at least a couple of months. I don't think it'll be very long before we see what changes are made in those documents, but certainly there is, my understanding is there's going to be new drafts coming out in both of those documents in the next several months. So that's something that we also will be considering. So that's, I think, where we're going in 2019. And then from a building perspective, if planning's busy, building's busy. Because we kind of are the start of the ship and they're the tail end. So there's been a lot of permits. Maybe not as many new dwelling units in 2018 as there have been in some previous years, but it seems like the amount of inspections and the building permits issued is still very high. I should also note that based on the number of permits applications that we already have in, I think they have 160 permits in for Eden Oak already, so new dwelling units. So there's no question that 2019 is going to be a busy year for the building department. They're working very hard on creating an e-permit system, which I think will be terrific from a customer service point of view. And also they are continuing to up the level of service, and certainly their building code programs and their service standards are continuing to be improved. I'm very pleased with our new CBO and the work that he's doing to bring the department more and more in line with a modern building department. And I think that's probably enough for me. Your Worship, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nancy. First, we'll go to the gallery, and seeing no comments from the gallery, then I'll go around the table. Council, any questions for Nancy? Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you for your presentation. You say that 229 new dwelling units were created in 2018.
Yes.
But I've written down here from the presentation that the Treasurer made that 380 new homes were created last year. Can one of you explain that discrepancy?
We can explain that.
Thank you.
It takes a while because for example, the year before, there were 415 permits issued, and it takes a while from the time the permit's issued till it gets on the tax rolls. So there's a lag there. So by the time it gets to her department, it means somebody's living there, where in my department, it could be a foundation. Is that simple enough, Marjorie?
Treasurer?
If I could just add to that, that's a simple case of Wildwood. It's the 177 condos that were started being lived in January of 2017 that didn't come online until 2018. That's the main reason.
We probably issued the permit in 2016.
Yeah, and that is the main reason for the numbers. You just have to watch which way it's going.
Thank you very much.
Any others? No? And Marjorie, who have you got next? Thank you, Nancy.
Walk you around with my, sorry.
Thank you very much for having me here today. Just a few points, so you'll have more chance on Thursday to sort of dive into this. But if you look at our accomplishments, you'll notice mostly what they are is programming accomplishments. As you see at the bottom of that list, the Collingwood Public Library Board, the previous board, created a strategic plan, and part of doing that was going out to the community and asking them what kind of library services they would like. But what we were hearing from people is they would like to see more programs, and they'd like to see us moving our programs out of the library. So that's what we did in 2018. You can see particularly we aimed at new programs and services for seniors, which have proved to be very popular. We introduced two programs to assist new Canadians in Collingwood. One was called the Immigrant Hub Project, which was actually started in 2017, but we really got going in 2018. And I'm pleased to say that that project just won the Minister's Award for Innovation, which was just awarded to them at the beginning of February. So this was done with all libraries all across Simcoe County, so that was good. We also started a program which was a mentoring program where we would pair, the idea was we would pair senior citizens in town with new Canadians to assist them with moving into a new community, and that's also proved to be very popular. We've started taking our programs to places outside the library, like nursing homes and retirement homes. We've always been doing this in schools and daycares. And most recently, we started taking programs to Blue Mountain residents. So we've been doing things like Books on Wheels for years, but now what we're doing is we're actually taking the whole program into to a nursing home and doing it right there, because there's a lot of people who can't make it to the library. That's what we're discovering. So that's been great. And by the end of last year, we'd achieved 90% of the goals that we set for ourselves in the Public Library Strategic Plan. So that was a great achievement as well. So pressures, yes, growth, obviously everybody's going to tell you that growth is the big thing. Last year we actually had 956 people on average come through the door of the library, so almost 1,000 people. And in January and February this year, it's already more than it was in January and February of last year. So we're getting a lot of people coming through the door of the library. And that puts pressure on the staff to deliver services as well. I've mentioned this before in other budget presentations, but more and more library services are moving online. E-books and e-audiobooks are things that people know about, but also we have a lot of databases that we have to subscribe to, and those services are very expensive. Now, we've managed to cope with that by partnering with other libraries in Simcoe County and sharing the costs. We're doing consortium buying. That's really made our money go a long way. And as usual, or as I've said in other budget presentations, we have a growing population of citizens who are at risk and living below the poverty line, and many of them come to the library on a regular basis. I think in a way, the library is sort of the barometer of the community. We tend to see people there, and we see the problems people are suffering, and we try to assist them as best we can. Oh, thank you. Are you changing these? I thought I was doing it, but I was not. So our highlights for the budget that you're going to be seeing is I want to ensure that the staffing is sufficient to allow us to deliver the needed services. So my big ask, this is my big reveal, is I'm actually gonna ask for the first time for another staff member at the library. That's the big change in the budget. Otherwise, the budget you're going to see is pretty much the same budget I presented for the last 3 years, just adjusted for inflation. I would really like to complete the work on the library roof this year. That's been dragging on for a while. And I'd like to replace or modify the entrance doors to meet accessibility requirements. We've had both the accessibility committee and our own accessibility audits say that people find it really hard to use those doors to get in and out of the library. So I'm hoping that's something we can do again this year as well. And when I say here plan for expected population growth, what I'm pointing out is that the building itself was designed for a population of about 20,000 people, which is where Collingwood is now. And we're continuing to grow. So I guess what I'm asking council to consider is setting aside money for the time when we do have to expand, either going up to the 3rd floor or maybe opening a small branch somewhere in town. But it'd be nice to start setting that money aside now. And I was just talking, I know there's a DC study going on right now, and I was talking to people about that, and they're of the same mind. So I was thrilled because I thought, oh, that's good. Other people are thinking along the same lines. So I'm hoping that's something that can be somehow put into the budget as well. That's basically it.
Thank you, Ken. Any questions from the gallery or comments? Seeing none, council? Question, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I'll just make the comment, congratulations for the Minister's Award.
Thank you. Yeah, that was really nice.
Well done.
We didn't think we'd get it because we were up against all these big city projects, right? And then yeah, we got the announcement, so that was great. And that was something we share with other libraries in Simcoe County because we all got together to put that project together. So that was nice. Feather and Simcoe County Libraries caps, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And congratulations on 90% achievable of your strat plan 3 years in, so you're doing well, you're ahead of the curve.
So my new board will have to give me a whole bunch more to do, I guess.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Dean, are you up?
Your worship, been a strange twist of reality. I think I might be the quickest person up here. Not normal. So in terms of 2018 accomplishments, council and committee are aware of our gathering circle success and the fact that it sort of was the kickoff for step 1 of phase 1 of the waterfront master plan. We did add 22 new slips and 300 plus feet of promenade dock at the harbor. And we also have completed, at least in 2018, it completed not just the public engagement, but also the draft document of the master plan. The Healthy Kids Community Challenge was brought to a successful conclusion with more than 30 interventions last year, reaching more than 19,000 people. That was the end of a 4-year program that saw a great deal of impact on the community. Regarding budget pressures, you've heard the word growth a lot. You're going to hear it probably a lot through the whole budget process. Where parks, trails, and harbors are concerned, increases in infrastructure is one thing. So every new subdivision comes usually with a new park, and that requires new machinery, new personnel. It has an impact on what we're capable of doing. But even more than that, even when we replace a playground now, it requires more maintenance. It requires because there's more people using it. Our trails are facing more use than they ever have, and we can see those impacts on our maintenance schedules. So growth is not just what we've been building new, but also the influx in use of infrastructure that already exists. In recreation facilities, we continue to have increased requirements for risk management, protecting the public and also protecting the liability of the town. When we went from 1 ice pad to 2 ice pads and a covered pool, we only increased staff by a couple. And so the problem there is that as we seek to kind of keep up with risk management practices, we're challenged by not having the staff to monitor and follow the procedures. So that's one challenge that we'll see through the budget over the next few years. In community recreation, our pool is once again breaking records for enrollment, which is amazing. But at the same time, we're currently actually, along with almost every pool I've spoken with in Ontario, facing the same challenge of a cohort or a non-existent cohort to fill lifeguarding and head guarding and instructional responsibilities. We feel like there is another cohort coming behind this one, but right now we're struggling with growth in programming and not having staff to fulfill it. So we have to get strategic and work with our community partners to try and solve those problems. In culture and events, I feel like this is the broken record. We're always trying to balance the provision of services with adequate resource levels. It's challenging to create events, obviously, but really understand and know what the balance point is for resources to request from council or to provide to the event or to the cultural endeavor. So that's basically the budget pressures, and the last page is our key highlights for 2019. This could have been a much bigger list, both fortunately and unfortunately. Last year was a challenging year to accomplish the things we did. I think we're setting ourselves up to be challenged again, but we'll get it done. One of the big highlights that came out of the Waterfront Master Plan and that we're hoping to get started on and finish in 2019, well, at least break ground on in 2019, is the design and construction of a water play facility at Harborview Park. Normally called a splash pad. We're trying to change language a little bit, but it'll be a significant addition to the community. You may have seen the survey recently regarding the redesign and construction of the Sunset Point Playground, formerly known as Enviro Park. It's already generated a lot of interest. I think we had about 500 responses to the survey over the weekend that we dropped on Friday. So that'll be another key highlight for 2019. For many years, soccer players have battled with porta-johns out at Fisher Field, and so we're excited to get started on the design and construction of Fisher Fieldhouse, which will be permanent washrooms and some amenities, community space. We began discussions with an architect last week. One of the key outcomes of the PRC master plan that's in draft form right now, subject to council approval or reception, is a plan to reduce barriers. So this covers a lot of ground. This covered everything from Collingwood moving more in the direction of an age-friendly community, as well as dealing with access to affordable recreation, as well as dealing with physical accessibility as well. So there are a number of barriers that were identified within the plan that we're hoping to kind of collect under a plan to address these in a bit of a constructive and strategic way. And we'd like to get that plan done this year. And then everybody's aware, I think, of the cycle plan that was began last year, and we're looking to have that completed and delivered this year. And like I said, there's a number of highlights, including some docs for Bing that could be on this list, but this is a bit of an overview. So, any questions?
Thank you very much, Dean. For being so efficient, you'll probably get to be the first department that gets to rip down your base budget for us.
That's right.
So any comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll look around the table. Council, any questions for Dean? Councillor Comey.
Thank you, through your worship. Just a comment. I don't know, I suppose potentially being on the front line of school-aged children and the feedback, and it's certainly not news to you, but looking at your highlights and plans for 2019, I think if we were to see those accomplished, I dare say there might be a parade in your honor. They could not be more anticipated or welcomed or celebrated by the public at large. And in the discussion of taxation and our residents' expectation for lifestyle and the amenities in exchange for that, this is the sort of thing that our residents and families of all ages are looking for. So I'm very excited.
Through your worship, if I could just respond by saying no parades. Second of all, I'd like to say that expectations need to be, I want to make sure that we have expectations in the right place. So these are all in the design phase, they're all in the development phase, and our goal would be to break ground and have them complete this year. But, you know, after my When Gathering Circle experience last year, we're not we're not making that kind of a promise, so it may be a 2020.
I'm very optimistic, Dean. I'm incredibly optimistic that we will get there.
CAO?
Just a reminder, those highlights are all subject to budget approval.
Correct.
Message taken. Thank you very much, Dean. Oh, yeah, Deputy Mayor.
Through you to the director, just a question regarding branding. The Enviro Park that was put together a number of years ago with funding from Upper Tier and the Environment Network, et cetera, locally. We've got a number of other parks throughout the community that are branded because of their original association, maybe there were partial funds that came from maybe a community group, et cetera. Do we have a policy in place that going forward as it relates to the naming or the branding of a particular park or facility? And or are we going to be soliciting for potential maybe fundraising dollars for something like the, sorry, you said you're using a different word, so let me see what that word is now.
Water play facility?
Thank you, water play facility, where, you know, donations could be made in memory of or in name of, et cetera, similar to what we did with the building of the new library.
Thank you, through your worship. So those fundraising opportunities, I believe, are all on the table. The challenge we've had in the past is having the resources to go and approach it. It is a project, and it's not something that we've had the resources to go after in the past, and at least in my department. But they're not to say that they aren't on the table and aren't possible. With respect to your question about policy for branding or naming a park, I believe that the naming convention for neighborhood parks is based on the developer. I believe they sort of do the naming and we pick up that name. I believe that's the case. But I don't know that there's a policy, and maybe I could even look to Clerk Almas if she's aware of a policy that guides us.
Do you have a facility naming policy?
Yeah.
Thanks, Dean. Marjorie, who's next?
Martin.
Martin, come on up.
Mayor, Deputy Mayor, councillors, thank you very much for making time for this today. I'm just going to briefly go through some of the key accomplishments. They're grouped in 6 categories. These 6 categories come out of the original Economic Development Action Plan that was approved by the previous council, and we're certainly due for an update of that this year. More on that a bit later. In terms of existing business support, we continue to grow our engagement with them. Last year we did 13 informational tours, and more on that at this evening's standing committee meeting, but that's essentially a chance where we connect standing committee and council members with businesses. We actually go on 2 of them, 2 to 3 a month during the key business seasons, and it's a chance to talk to them for an hour and just find out more. And that's been a huge point of engagement for companies where literally they haven't seen a councillor for 15 years and all of a sudden they're like, thank you, I get to just say hello and you get to recognize my company. We have over 30 company success stories now on our website. We post weekly on our Facebook success stories from those various businesses, whether they're recognized for awards or other such things. And we also host a quarterly CAO leadership discussion. That's something that CAO Amin started and has been a real neat point of informal discussion with them. Small business support, our Small Business Enterprise Center does over 650 consultations. That's up 8% last year versus the year prior. They're part of almost 3,000 consultations that happen annually at the Business Development Center, and they also manage starter company and summer company grants. That's a total of about $100,000 that goes out to companies, and that's courtesy of the provincial government with some support from the town. The Centre for Business and Economic Development approved over 12 different companies for expansion funding, and they actively manage over 50 businesses that are actually receiving funding and coaching on an ongoing basis. Once again, if you take a look at the list of companies they actually manage, there are lots of major names in Collingwood that have come through that service, and that's a federally funded operation. And then we work closely with Georgian College in terms of offering mentorship and pitch prep workshop sessions. Next one is coming up, the Excite Pitch competition this spring. Business service is obviously a key priority for us. Overall inquiries are up 8%, Business Development Center. We did a survey last spring, 86% awareness amongst businesses of the Business Development Center, so that's going well for us. We need to increase our awareness of some of the specific services there, but that's coming this year. We also started new digital intake portals, so similar to what planning and building is doing in terms of digifying. We are likewise digifying so that when people are interested in meeting with us, they can enter their information into a digital portal, we can track it, we can get back to them, and we can follow up with them. Next slide, please. Business and tourism promotion, these go hand in hand. We certainly focus on our digital footprint, and right now we have over 20,000 followers through social media, it's got enough power out there to make sure that when we have something to say, it really does get heard. It's not unusual for 5,000, 10,000 views. Recent poem that we posted, thanks to our poet laureate, got over 25,000 views and huge shares. So our digital footprint is really growing quite nicely. Implementation of a new wayfinding signage program is underway, working with various partners, including the BIA, PRC, Public Works. Implementation is going to be happening through this spring. Now we'll place about 50 signs from the periphery down into the downtown area, and that's a partnership program with RTO7. They're funding half of that. Finally, we've also put on over 30 different networking and educational events through the BDC partners and myself to make sure we're really engaging with businesses. And we use that as a major point of promotion outside of here as well, in terms of look at all the great networking that's happening here. Workforce at Work really speaks for itself. I think one of the big highlights has been the success of the Transportation Task Force. Hours increased by 22%. As previous meetings you've heard about the traffic growth, some real success there, and that's a really neat partnership with the other municipalities in terms of promoting that. Our youth activities are going along well, and last but not least, Great Place for Business. We did launch our first business survey, which had some great insights around where we're doing well and opportunities for improvement. Next slide. Budget pressures, 3. People often go, you know what, that's great that you're going for RTO7 funding and RED funding and keep it going. They require tons and tons of resources, not only from my side, but from finance's side. In terms of managing these, it is a huge amount of work. So we are very judicious about what we apply for. If it's not $50,000 to $100,000 or more, it really isn't worth all the time that goes into it. That said, we're keeping our eyes open. Any opportunities that come up, we go after them very hard. That includes partnerships with companies in terms of sponsorship. But just want to make sure that you're aware that those things that do get co-funded have taken a lot of effort. We're certainly searching for the right ones, but we can't just go out there and apply for everything. Tech Cluster Employee and Business Attraction Campaign. You'll be hearing more about this over the coming days. It's called the Live More Now campaign. You can look it up at livemorenow.ca/Collingwood. And it's a campaign that's really going to be kicking off to try and raise the awareness of all the great tech companies that we've got here in Collingwood. You'll see about 15 different company names mentioned there, but that's continuing to grow. The support that we're getting from those companies and the engagement that they're showing, because they know that we're helping them with their employees, is huge. And we expect this to continue growing in terms of the importance and the engagement that we're getting. So it's a good pressure to have, but certainly the engagement that we're getting from the companies is significant and very positive, but we got to manage it carefully. Last but not least, and this has just come up recently, the Small Business Enterprise Center is a provincially funded organization. As of yet, we have not heard from the province if they are going to be continuing to fund this. Our contract with the province expires March 31st of this year. You saw how many consultations they do, and they're the lifeblood of the entrepreneurial energy that has been so well recognized in the town. So we updated CAO Amin on that this morning, so we're waiting with bated breath to see what happens. We'll see what happens over the next 4 weeks. Next slide. Key highlights for 2019. Certainly we're continuing to support existing businesses. With the engagement we talked about, we're going to be launching a new Collingwood Tech 5x5 program thanks to the creative space. We are continuing to do small business growth promotion with the BDC as well as Georgian College as well as other partners. Business service continues to be a priority, and looking forward to renew that partnership agreement this year because it's due for an update. Certainly working on integrating our customer service efforts with planning and building. And last but not least, I mentioned this, developing a new economic development action plan is a key piece of making sure we grow our business service as a priority. And then the rest of them sort of speak for themselves in terms of continuing to promote. You'll note that the tech cluster promotion is certainly a big part of what we're looking to do moving forward into this year. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Any questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, council around the table. Any questions for Martin? Councillor Hanlon?
Through your worship, you mentioned that you post weekly on Facebook. I'm just wondering, for those who would want to follow what's being posted, how would they find it on Facebook?
That's a great question. So if you go to www.facebook.com and you just type in Experience Collingwood into the search bar, you'll see Experience Collingwood pop up, and you can just select that and follow us, and you'll get all the updates. There are also a whole bunch of events that are posted on there that you could follow. They'll send out reminders, and there's some great photos and videos as well to enjoy.
Thank you.
CEO.
Thank you. Just want to follow up on that question by Councillor Hamlin. I think that's one of the things we're trying to do as well, in keeping with the establishment of a consistent brand across the municipality. We got to find a way to ensure that it's easier for us to find some of these social media sites. So one of the things we're doing is, how can we consolidate this common brand and this common interface? Because right now we don't have that, and I think we need to sort of think about how we do it in a more consistent and uniform way across the organization. So this common branding is one thing that I think we'll have to put some thoughts to as we try to increase the number of people who follow or get access to us, and the website is going to try and begin that process.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, Councillor McLeod.
Through you, your worship, what are the implications if Queen's Park decides to end the program that you're connected with?
Through Mayor Saunderson, that's something that we're going to have to dwell on over the next few weeks. Obviously, there's a consultation piece that they do a huge job with. They help us organize events. They organize their own events. At the same time, we're realizing that our customer service priorities may also be shifting. So we have to take that into consideration. So at this point, I don't quite have the crystal ball on that, but certainly we'll know in the next few weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you.
Who's next, Marjorie?
Last but not least, it's Brian.
Director McDonald, come on up.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So under my department, there are 5 departments, and so I've tried to compress all the departments into one presentation. With Engineering Public Works, accomplishments for 2018, we completed our annual sewer renewal, and we finished 7th and 8th Street. We also completed Hamilton Street, one block of Hamilton Street, adjacent to here, Ontario. The Highway 26 project with NTO, although it's not a town project, we're involved in that through our staff. That's underway. Asphalt resurfacing, we were able to repave 1.9 kilometers of road. The EA for Mountain Road was initiated, and we hope to have that wrapped up this year. In transit, we completed our new transit terminal and washroom facilities. We had extended hour service that we had a report last committee meeting, and we replaced the Red Cross bus with a new bus. In the wastewater, we've initiated the UV disinfection system at the wastewater treatment plant, and we've started, and it's almost complete, the Minnesota Street pumping station. In the water, backflow prevention program is ongoing, and we did a lot of work last year on that program. replacement of one filter train at the wastewater treatment plant. That was a big replacement. And we initiated the mass deployment of the transmitters throughout the municipality, all the residential homes. Fleet and facilities, we did a town-wide accommodation review, and that addressed accommodation needs for the staff within the town. Budget pressures. So there's a few small issues that we'd like to initiate, and these are kind of highlights of stuff that we've asked additional monies for. Additional crack sealing. This is a preventative maintenance program. We did a lot last year, but we need to do more. We're behind in terms of doing some crack sealing that prolongs the life of the pavement. New storm and sanitary sewer software. We've, with our master servicing, we've got some modeling software, and we don't have that in-house, and we need that in order to keep the modeling update, but also deals with applications from developments as well. Prairie River spill study, we'd like to complete a study that will hopefully protect a number of homes in the town. Recent studies by development showed that the flows are less than what they were originally anticipated back in the 80s, and so there's a large portion of Collingwood under a 2-zone or a flood protection, and that hopefully through this study will be eliminated, and it will free up a lot more red tape for those particular homeowners. Summer student, we've had summer students in the past. The last couple of years we didn't. We'd like to get back into that program, but because we're getting back into it in this budget, it's an increase in the budget from previous years. Extended hours of transit, we've had that report. That's a significant part of our transit budget. Additional funding for transit maps, as we'd like to provide more maps, and we've found a need for additional money for that. Fleet and facilities, we'd like to implement WorkTech fleet and facility management systems within fleet and facilities to assist us with our various work programs within our facilities. Key highlights, there's a number of them here. Studies, we have a number of studies we're recommending: transportation study, master storm study, completion of the master servicing, and that Prairie River spill study I talked about. Construction in the works for this year. We've got Lockhart and Campbell turning lanes, 3rd and High intersection improvements, Huron-Ontario Hamilton Street crosswalk, 70 Huron Street storm improvements, Napier Street North sanitary sewer renewal. So that's the project we're proposing for a sanitary sewer renewal this year. 2nd Street sidewalk, and the completion of Highway 26. From the design perspective, we've got Mountain Road and the 10th line to design once the EA is done, and there's a storm improvements on Minnesota Street Storm. Asphalt resurfacing and sidewalk is part of our regular program, but we have, again, we'd like to continue with that. From a transit perspective, we're not proposing any increases this year, and that's consistent with our 2 neighboring municipalities. They haven't increased, so we're not proposing any increases there. Extended hours, we've already talked about that, so next slide please. In the wastewater, we've got brick replacement on one of the buildings, one of the facility buildings down there, generator replacement, I&I investigation, that's inflow and infiltration into our system. Black Ash Creek pumping station, that's been tendered and we're ready to award that. In the water, we've got Carmichael Reservoir upgrades, Stewart Road Reservoir, the treatment plant expansion, environmental assessment, negotiation of water supply agreement with New Tech. Water main replacements on Campbell and Napier Street are proposed. The transmitter project, hopefully we can wrap that up this year. Fleet facilities, Town Hall brick, Town Hall emergency generator, generator design, the engineering design for the Public Works building for the possible expansion and bringing the water department over there. That's it. That's a brief summary. We will have probably details for you on Thursday. We go through each of the what we plan with all of them, but there's a lot of information there. I thought, considering this is an introductory, I thought we'd keep it as short as possible, even then I thought it was long.
Very, it was a thorough introduction, and we're looking forward then to the fleshing out. It's an ambitious year. I'll look for questions from the gallery. Seeing none, then questions around the table. Council members? Councillor Hanlon.
I happened to read the last transportation plan on the weekend. I know I have a boring life. And so I noticed you mentioned that we would be updating that plan this year. And if someone like myself wanted to make some suggestions about assumptions or how to approach, for the consultant before they're finished, how would one do that?
You certainly email me. That project started last year. The consultant is already underway. So if you have some items, we can send that to them right away.
Thank you.
I guess an overlay on top of that is the second or third stage of the Simcoe links could impact that as well with the lines coming from Barrie.
That was a transportation study, but the transit study, yes, definitely. There was some discussions with the county over their Simcoe links. They plan on initiating that in August, and we're currently talking to them about the options for the link between Wasaga Beach and Collingwood in terms of how that integrates into their system or doesn't integrate into their system.
No other questions then? Oh, Deputy Mayor.
Through you to the director, a question maybe for Thursday. Would you be kind enough in your presentation to give all of council just an overview specific to work in town, so not new subdivisions, as it relates to when and when we do not put in a sidewalk? So I know you've got Napier Street, for example, to have work done, but in past years, I'm thinking of like Manning, there was work done, but sidewalks weren't put in there. Just to give us a 30,000 foot level overview.
Will do.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Brian. Oh, Councillor Coney.
Sorry, just very quickly, and I'll wrap up. Thank you. Through you, Director, great presentation. I'd just like to give my fellow councillors a heads up and a comment. I'm very, very pleased to see under the Director's priorities that crosswalk at the Hamilton Drain Trail. I know I'm in receipt of emails I'm reached out to on social media, and we heard a lot of talk here today actually about community safety issues, from crossing guards to lifeguards, and here we are talking about a crosswalk. So I look forward to further discussion on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Marjorie is signaling me that that was the end of our presentations on the budget, and as we know, we'll be having a more in-depth meeting this Thursday. I would encourage council members that if you do have other questions that you'd like addressed on Thursday, if you can send those to the respective directors ahead of time or the treasurer, it might make things progress faster on Thursday. We are now at the end of our agenda. I'll make a call for public deputations. If anyone has any comments on items they've heard today or anything else relating to the budget procedure, they can come forward now. Seeing none, just before I look for a motion for adjournment, the county is in the middle of its It Starts campaign, which is part of our immigration plan and becoming an inclusive, diverse community and region. I have these placards. Deputy Mayor and I have already done our pictures down at Simcoe County, but I would encourage everyone and member around the table to come pick up a placard, write in your word, whether it be diversity, inclusion, respect, compassion, empathy, all those sorts of great things, and take a picture and post it. So these are here, and I'll hand them out after the meeting, and with that, I will entertain a motion for adjournment. Councillor Jeffrey. All in favor? Thank you very much, everyone. And for those who are with us for the corporate community services, we will be starting at 5 p.m. today. Thank you.